Wow, it's Sunday again. Welcome back to Another World Audiobooks. Thank you guys for tuning in. I do publish these on Sunday afternoons, so that's why I said Sunday. If it's not Sunday and you're listening to this, talk about a time warp. That's crazy. You're basically doing time travel. Thanks guys for tuning in, and we are almost done with this book. I can't believe it. Another Tarzan book almost in the books. So if you're enjoying this, I would love to hear from you. Please get in touch. Please drop a review. That helps other people find the podcast, and the more people we have listening, the more I'm able to do this podcast and continue to put out episodes for you on a weekly basis. So there's a lot of time and a lot of effort that goes into it, so any support you can throw this way is very, very much appreciated. Thanks guys for listening, and without further ado, let's jump right into the next chapter of The Beasts of Tarzan. Chapter 19. The Last of the Kincaid. Shortly after the break of day, Tarzan was on the deck, noting the condition of the weather. The wind had abated. The sky was cloudless. Every condition seemed ideal for the commencement of the return voyage to Jungle Island, where the beasts were to be left, and then home. The ape-man aroused the mate and gave instructions that the Kincaid sail at the earliest possible moment. The remaining members of the crew, safe in Lord Greystoke's assurance that they would not be prosecuted for their share in the villainies of the two Russians, hastened with cheerful alacrity to their several duties. The beasts, liberated from the confinement of the hold, wandered about the deck, not a little to the discomfiture of the crew, in whose mind there remained a still vivid picture of the savagery of the beasts in conflict with those who had gone to their deaths beneath the fangs and talons which even now seemed itching for the soft flesh of further prey. Beneath the watchful eyes of Tarzan and Mugambi, however, Sheeta and the apes of Akut curbed their desires, so that the men worked about the deck amongst them in far greater security than they imagined. At last, the Kincaid slipped down the Ugambi and ran out upon the shimmering waters of the Atlantic. Tarzan and Jane Clayton watched the verdure-clad shoreline receding in the ship's wake, and for once the ape-man left his native soil without one single pang of regret. No ship that sailed the seven seas could have borne him away from Africa to resume his search for his lost boy with half the speed that the Englishman would have desired, and the slow-moving Kincaid seemed scarce to move at all to the impatient mind of the bereaved father. Yet the vessel made progress even when she seemed to be standing still, and presently the low hills of Jungle Island became distinctly visible upon the western horizon ahead. In the cabin of Alexander Paulvitch, the thing within the black box ticked, 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 with apparently unending monotony. But yet, second by second, a little arm which protruded from the periphery of one of its wheels came nearer and nearer to another little arm which projected from the hand which Paulvitch had set at a certain point upon the dial beside the clockwork. When those two arms touched one another, the ticking of the mechanism would cease. Forever. Jane and Tarzan stood upon the bridge, looking out toward Jungle Island. The men were forward, also watching the land grow upward out of the ocean. The beasts had sought the shade of the galley, where they were curled up in sleep. All was quiet and peace upon the ship, and upon the waters. Suddenly, without warning, the cabin roof shot up into the air. A cloud of dense smoke puffed far above the Kincaid. There was a terrific explosion which shook the vessel from stem to stern. Instantly, pandemonium broke loose upon the deck. The apes of Akut, terrified by the sound, ran hither and thither, snarling and growling. Sheeta leaped here and there, screaming out his startled terror in hideous cries that sent the ice of fear straight to the hearts of the Kincaid's crew. Mugambi, too, was trembling. Only Tarzan of the apes and his wife retained their composure. Scarce had the debris settled than the ape-man was among the beasts, quieting their fears, talking to them in low, pacific tones, stroking their shaggy bodies, and assuring them, as only he could, that the immediate danger was over. An examination of the wreckage showed that their greatest danger now lay in fire, for the flames were licking hungrily at the splintered wood of the wrecked cabin, and had already found a foothold upon the lower deck through a great jagged hole which the explosion had opened. By a miracle, no member of the ship's company had been injured by the blast, the origin of which remained forever a total mystery to all but one, the sailor who knew that Paulvitch had been aboard the Kincaid and in his cabin the previous night. He guessed the truth, but discretion sealed his lips. It would doubtless fare none too well for the man who had permitted the arch-enemy of them all aboard the ship in the watches of the night, where later he might set an infernal machine to blow them all to kingdom come. No, the man decided that he would keep this knowledge to himself. As the flames gained headway, it became apparent to Tarzan that whatever had caused the explosion had scattered some highly flammable substance upon the surrounding woodwork. For the water which they poured in from the pump seemed rather to spread than to extinguish the blaze. 15 minutes after the explosion, great black clouds of smoke were rising from the hold of the doomed vessel. The flames had reached the engine room, and the ship no longer moved toward the shore. Her fate was as certain as though the waters had already closed above her charred and smoking remains. "It is useless to remain aboard her longer," remarked the ape-man to the mate. "There is no telling but there may be other explosions, and as we cannot hope to save her, the safest thing which we can do is to take to the boats without further loss of time and make land." Nor was there other alternative. Only the sailors could bring away any belongings, for the fire, which had not yet reached the forecastle, had consumed all in the vicinity of the cabin, which the explosion had not destroyed. 2 boats were lowered, and as there was no sea, the landing was made with infinite ease. Eager and anxious, the beasts of Tarzan sniffed the familiar air of their native island as the small boats drew in toward the beach, and scarce had their keels grated upon the sand than Sheeta and the apes of Akut were over the bows and racing swiftly toward the jungle. A half-sad smile curved the lips of the ape-man as he watched them go. "Goodbye, my friends," he murmured. "You have been good and faithful allies, and I shall miss you."
"They will return, will they not, dear?" asked Jane Clayton at his side.
"They may, and they may not," replied the ape-man. "They have been ill at ease since they were forced to accept so many human beings into their confidence. Mugambi and I alone affected them less, for he and I are at best but half human. You, however, and the members of the crew are far too civilized for my beasts. It is you whom they are fleeing. Doubtless they feel that they cannot trust themselves in the close vicinity of so much perfectly good food, without the danger that they may help themselves to a mouthful some time by mistake."
Jane laughed.
"I think they are just trying to escape you," she retorted.
"You are always making them stop something which they see no reason why they should not do. Like little children, they are doubtless delighted at this opportunity to flee from the zone of parental discipline. If they come back, though, I hope they won't come by night."
"Or come hungry, eh?" laughed Tarzan. For 2 hours after landing, the little party stood watching the burning ship which they had abandoned. Then there came faintly to them from across the water the sound of a second explosion. The Kincaid settled rapidly, almost immediately thereafter, and sank within a few minutes. The cause of the second explosion was less a mystery than that of the first, the mate attributing it to the bursting of the boilers when the flames had finally reached them. But what had caused the first explosion was a subject of considerable speculation among the stranded company. Chapter 20. Jungle Island Again. The first consideration of the party was to locate fresh water and make camp, for all knew that their term of existence upon Jungle Island might be drawn out to months or even years. Tarzan knew the nearest water, and to this he immediately led the party. Here the men fell to work to construct shelters and rude furniture, while Tarzan went into the jungle after meat, leaving the faithful Mugambi and the Mosula woman to guard Jane, whose safety he would never trust to any members of the Kincaid's cutthroat crew. Lady Greystoke suffered far greater anguish than any other of the castaways, for the blow to her hopes and her already cruelly lacerated mother heart lay not in her own privations, but in the knowledge that she might now never be able to learn the fate of her firstborn, or do aught to discover his whereabouts, or ameliorate his condition. A condition which imagination naturally pictured in the most frightful forms. For 2 weeks, the party divided the time among the various duties which had been allotted to each. A daylight watch was maintained from sunrise to sunset upon a bluff near the camp, a jutting shoulder of rock which overlooked the sea. Here, ready for instant lighting, was gathered a huge pile of dry branches, while from a lofty pole which they had set in the ground there floated an improvised distress signal fashioned from a red undershirt which belonged to the mate of the Kincaid. But never a speck upon the horizon that might be sail or smoke rewarded the tired eyes that in their endless, hopeless vigil strained daily out across the vast expanse of ocean. It was Tarzan who suggested, finally, that they attempt to construct a vessel that would bear them back to the mainland. He alone could show them how to fashion rude tools, and when the idea had taken root in the minds of the men, they were eager to commence their labors. But as time went on and the Herculean nature of their task became more and more apparent, they fell to grumbling and to quarreling among themselves, so that to the other dangers were now added dissension and suspicion. More than before did Tarzan now fear to leave Jane among the half-brutes of the Kincaid's crew. But hunting he must do, for none other could so surely go forth and return with meat as he. Sometimes Mugambi spelled him at the hunting, but the black spear and arrows were never so sure of results as the rope and knife of the ape-man. Finally, the men shirked their work, going off into the jungle by twos to explore and to hunt. All this time, the camp had had no sight of Sheeta, or Akut and the other great apes, though Tarzan had sometimes met them in the jungle as he hunted. And as matters tended from bad to worse in the camp of the castaways upon the east coast of Jungle Island, another camp came into being upon the north coast. Here, in a little cove, lay a small schooner, the Cowrie, whose decks had but a few days since run red with the blood of her officers and the loyal members of her crew. For the Cowrie had fallen upon bad days, when it had shipped such men as Gust and Momula the Maori, and that arch-fiend Kai Shang of Ashan. There were others, too, 10 of them all told, the scum of the South Sea ports. But Gust and Momula and Kai Shang were the brains and cunning of the company. It was they who had instigated the mutiny, that they might seize and divide the catch of pearls, which constituted the wealth of the Cowrie's cargo. It was Kai Shang who had murdered the captain as he lay asleep in his berth, and it had been Momula the Maori who had led the attack upon the officers of the watch. Gust, after his own peculiar habit, had found means to delegate to the others the actual taking of life. Not that Gust entertained any scruples on the subject, other than those which induced in him a rare regard for his own personal safety. There is always a certain element of risk to the assassin, for victims of deadly assault are seldom prone to die quietly and considerately. There is always a certain element of risk to go so far as to dispute the issue with the murderer. It was this chance of dispute which Gust preferred to forego. But now that the work was done, the Swede aspired to the position of highest command among the mutineers. He had even gone so far as to appropriate and wear certain articles belonging to the murdered captain of the Cowrie. Articles of apparel which bore upon them the badges and insignia of authority. Kai Shang was peeved. He had no love for authority, and certainly not the slightest intention of submitting to the domination of an ordinary Swede sailor. The seeds of discontent were, therefore, already planted in the camp of the mutineers of the Cowrie, at the north edge of Jungle Island. But Kai Shang realized that he must act with circumspection, for Gust alone of the motley horde possessed sufficient knowledge of navigation to get them out of the South Atlantic and around the Cape into more congenial waters, where they might find a market for their ill-gotten wealth and no questions asked. The day before they sighted Jungle Island, and discovered the little landlocked harbour upon the bosom of which the Cowrie now rode quietly at anchor, the watch had discovered the smoke and funnels of a warship upon the southern horizon. The chance of being spoken to and investigated by a man of war appealed not at all to any of them, so they put into hiding for a few days until the danger should have passed. And now Gust did not wish to venture out to sea again. There was no telling, he insisted, but that the ship they had seen was actually searching for them. Kai Shang pointed out that such could not be the case, since it was impossible for any human being other than themselves to have knowledge of what had transpired aboard the Cowrie. But Gust was not to be persuaded. In his wicked heart he nursed a scheme whereby he might increase his share of the booty by something like 100%.
He alone could sail the Cowrie, therefore the others could not leave Jungle Island without him. But what was there to prevent Gust, with just sufficient men to man the schooner, slipping away from Kai Shang, Mamula the Maori, and some half of the crew when opportunity presented? It was for this opportunity that Gust waited. Someday there would come a moment when Kai Shang, Mamula, and 3 or 4 of the others would be absent from camp, exploring or hunting. The Swede racked his brain for some plan whereby he might successfully lure from sight of the anchored ship those whom he had determined to abandon. To this end, he organized hunting party after hunting party, but always the devil of perversity seemed to enter the soul of Kai Shang, so that wily celestial would never hunt except in the company of Gust himself. One day, Kai Shang spoke secretly with Mamula the Maori, pouring into the brown ear of his companion the suspicions which he harbored concerning the Swede. Mamula was for going immediately and running a long knife through the heart of the traitor. It is true that Kai Shang had no other evidence than the natural cunning of his own knavish soul, but he imagined in the intentions of Gust what he himself would have been glad to accomplish had the means lain at hand. But he dared not let Mamula slay the Swede, upon whom they depended to guide them to their destination. They decided, however, that it would do no harm to attempt to frighten Gust into acceding to their demands, and with this purpose in mind, the Maori sought out the self-constituted commander of the party. When he broached the subject of immediate departure, Gust again raised his former objection, that the warship might very probably be patrolling the sea directly in their southern path, waiting for them to make the attempt to reach other waters. Mamula scoffed at the fears of his fellow, pointing out that as no one aboard any warship knew of their mutiny, there could be no reason why they should be suspected.
"Ah," exclaimed Gust, "that is where you are wrong. There is where you are lucky that you have an educated man like me to tell you what to do. You are an ignorant savage, Mamula, and so you know nothing of wireless."
The Maori leaped to his feet and laid his hand upon the hilt of his knife.
"I am no savage," he shouted. "I was only joking," the Swede hastened to explain. "We are old friends, Mamula. We cannot afford to quarrel, at least not while old Kai Shang is plotting to steal all the pearls from us. If he could find a man to navigate the Cowrie, he would leave us in a minute. All this talk about getting away from here is just because he has some scheme in his head to get rid of us." "But the wireless?" asked Mamula. "What has the wireless to do with our remaining here?" "Oh, yes," replied Gust, scratching his head. He was wondering if the Maori were really so ignorant as to believe the preposterous lie he was about to unload upon him. "Oh, yes. You see, every warship is equipped with what they call a wireless apparatus. It lets them talk to the other ships hundreds of miles away, and it lets them listen to all that is said on these other ships. Now, you see, when you fellows were shooting up the Cowrie, you did a whole lot of loud talking, and there isn't any doubt but that the warship was lying off south of us listening to it all. Of course, they might not have learned the name of the ship, but they heard enough to know that the crew of some ship was mutinying and killing her officers. So you see, they'll be waiting to search every ship they might for a long time to come, and they may not be far away now." When he had ceased speaking, the Swede strove to assume an air of composure that his listener might not have his suspicions aroused as to the truth of the statement that had just been made. Mamula sat for some time in silence, eyeing Gust. At last he rose. "You are a great liar," he said. "If you don't get us on our way by tomorrow, you'll never have another chance to die. For I heard 2 of the men saying that they'd like to run a knife into you, and that if you keep them in this hole any longer, they'd do it." "Go and ask Kai Shang if there is not a wireless," replied Gust. "He will tell you that there is such a thing, and that vessels can talk to one another across hundreds of miles of water. Then say to the 2 men who wish to kill me that if they do so, they will never live to spend their share of the swag, for only I can get you to safety to any port." So
Mamula went to Kai Shang and asked him if there was such an apparatus as a wireless, by means of which ships could talk with each other at great distances, and Kai Shang told him that there was. Mamula was puzzled, but still he wished to leave the island and was willing to take his chances on the open sea rather than to remain longer in the monotony of the camp.
"If we only had someone else who could navigate a ship," wailed Kai Shang.
That afternoon, Mamula went hunting with 2 other Maoris. They hunted toward the south, and had not gone far from camp when they were surprised by the sound of voices ahead of them in the jungle. They knew that none of their own men had preceded them, and as all were convinced that the island was uninhabited, they were inclined to flee in terror on the hypothesis that the place was haunted, possibly by the ghosts of the murdered officers and men of the Cowrie. But Mamula was even more curious than he was superstitious, and so he quelled his natural desire to flee from the supernatural. Motioning his companions to follow his example, he dropped to his hands and knees, crawling forward stealthily and with quakings of heart through the jungle in the direction from which came the voices of the unseen speakers. Presently, at the edge of a little clearing, he halted, and there he breathed a deep sigh of relief, for plainly before him he saw 2 flesh-and-blood men sitting upon a fallen log and talking earnestly together. One was Schneider, mate of the Kincaid, and the other was a seaman named Schmidt.
"I think we can do it, Schmidt,"
Schneider was saying.
"A good canoe wouldn't be hard to build, and 3 of us could paddle it to the mainland in a day if the wind was right and the sea reasonably calm. There ain't no use waiting for the men to build a big enough boat to take the whole party, for they're sore now and sick of working like slaves all day long. It ain't none of our business, anyway, to save that Englishman. Let him look out for himself, says I."
He paused for a moment, and then, eyeing the other to note the effect of his next words, he continued.
"But we might take the woman. It would be a shame to leave a nice-looking piece like she is in such a godforsaken hole as this here island."
Schmidt looked up and grinned.
"So that's how she's blowing, is it?"
he asked.
"Why didn't you say so in the first place? What's in it for me if I help you?" "She ought to pay us well to get her back to civilization," explained Schneider. "And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just whack up with the 2 men that helps me. I'll take half, and they can divide the other half. You and whoever the other bloke is. I'm sick of this place, and the sooner I get out of it, the better I'll like it. What do you say?" "Suits me," replied Schmidt. "I wouldn't know how to reach the mainland myself. I know that none of the other fellows would. So's you're the only one that knows anything of navigation. You're the fellow I'll tie to."
Mamula the Maori pricked up his ears. He had a smattering of every tongue that is spoken upon the seas, and more than a few times he had sailed on English ships, so that he understood fairly well all that had passed between Schneider and Schmidt since he had stumbled upon them. He rose to his feet and stepped into the clearing. Schneider and his companions started nervously, as though a ghost had risen before them. Schneider reached for his revolver. Mamula raised his right hand, palm forward, as a sign of his pacific intentions. "I am a friend," he said. "I heard you, but do not fear that I will reveal what you have said. I can help you, and you can help me." He was addressing Schneider. "You can navigate a ship, but you have no ship. We have a ship, but no one to navigate it. If you will come with us and ask no questions, we will let you take the ship where you will after you have landed us at a certain port, the name of which we will give you later. You can take the woman of whom you speak, and we will ask no questions either. Is it a bargain?" Schneider desired more information, and got as much as Mamula thought best to give him. Then the Maori suggested that they speak with Kai Shang. The 2 members of the Kincaid's company followed Mamula and his fellows to a point in the jungle close by the camp of the mutineers. Here Mamula hid them while he went in search of Kai Shang, first admonishing his Maori companions to stand guard over the 2 sailors, lest they change their minds and attempt to escape. Schneider and Schmidt were virtually prisoners, though they did not know it.
Presently, Mamula returned with Kai Shang, to whom he had briefly narrated the details of the stroke of good fortune that had come to them. The Chinaman spoke at length with Schneider, until, notwithstanding his natural suspicion of the sincerity of all men, he became quite convinced that Schneider was quite as much a rogue as himself, and that the fellow was anxious to leave the island. These two premises accepted, there could be little doubt that Schneider would prove trustworthy, insofar as accepting the command of the Cowrie was concerned. After that, Kai Shang knew that he could find means to coerce the man into submission to his further wishes. When Schneider and Schmidt left them and set out in the direction of their own camp, it was with feelings of far greater relief than they had experienced in many a day. Now, at last, they saw a feasible plan for leaving the island upon a seaworthy craft. There would be no more hard labor at shipbuilding, and no risking their lives upon a crudely built makeshift that would be quite as likely to go to the bottom as it was to reach the mainland. Also, they were to have assistance in capturing the woman, or rather, women, for when Mamula learned that there was a black woman in the other camp, he had insisted that she be brought along as well as the white woman. As Kai Shang and Mamula entered their camp, it was with the realization that they no longer needed Gust. They marched straight to the tent in which they might expect to find him at that hour of the day, for though it would have been more comfortable for the entire party to remain aboard the ship, they had mutually decided that it would be safer for all concerned were they to pitch their camp ashore. Each knew that in the heart of the others was sufficient treachery to make it unsafe for any member of the party to go ashore, leaving the others in possession of the Cowrie, so not more than 2 or 3 men at a time were ever permitted aboard the vessel, unless all the balance of the company were there too. As the two crossed toward Gust's tent, the Maori felt the edge of his long knife with one grimy, callous thumb. The Swede would have felt far from comfortable could he have seen this significant action, or read what was passing amid the convolutions of the brown man's cruel brain. Now it happened that Gust was at that moment in the tent occupied by the cook, and this tent stood a few feet from his own, so that he heard the approach of Kai Shang and Mamula, though he did not, of course, dream that it had any special significance for him. Chance had it, though, that he glanced out of the doorway of the cook's tent at the very moment that Kai Shang and Mamula approached the entrance to his, and he thought that he noted a stealthiness in their movements that comported poorly with amicable or friendly intentions. And then, just as they two slunk within the interior, Gust caught a glimpse of the long knife which Mamula the Maori was then carrying behind his back. The Swede's eyes opened wide, and a funny little sensation assailed the roots of his hairs. Also, he turned almost white beneath his tan. Quite precipitately, he left the cook's tent. He was not one who required a detailed exposition of intentions that were quite all too obvious. As surely as though he had heard them plotting, he knew that Kai Shang and Mamula had come to take his life. The knowledge that he alone could navigate the Cowrie had, up to now, been sufficient assurance of his safety. But quite evidently something had occurred of which he had no knowledge that would make it quite worth the while of his co-conspirators to eliminate him. Without a pause, Gust darted across the beach and into the jungle. He was afraid of the jungle. Uncanny noises that were indeed frightful came forth from its recesses, the tangled mazes of the mysterious country back of the beach. But if Gust was afraid of the jungle, he was far more afraid of Kai Shang and Mamula. The dangers of the jungle were more or less problematical, while the danger that menaced him at the hands of his companions was a perfectly well-known quantity, which might be expressed in terms of a few inches of cold steel, or the coil of a light rope. He had seen Kai Shang garrote a man at Pai Sha, in a dark alleyway back of Lu Kotai's place. He feared the rope, therefore, more than he did the knife of the Maori. But he feared them both too much to remain within reach of either. Therefore, he chose the pitiless jungle. Oh, I lied. That was 2 chapters of The Beast of Tarzan. I had a nice little short one there to start and a nice long one at the end. So if you guys enjoyed that extra special episode there. If you, like I said, if you are enjoying this book, if you could drop a review, I would really appreciate that. I don't ask for those a whole lot, but they do help, and I haven't had any in quite a while. So if you're enjoying this, we've had a ton of listeners, so somebody's enjoying this apparently, because everybody's listening to it. But just drop a review. This should be pretty easy to do in this day and age, depending on what platform you're using. But yeah, rating review helps a lot in helping other people realize that this is an awesome podcast and they need to be listening to it. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week for the final chapter of The Beast of Tarzan.
New season, new chaos in college football.
Let's go! Big stage, big opportunity.
This Labor Day weekend, the wildness lives on ABC, ESPN, and the all-new ESPN app.
What a way to start!
Featuring top 10 teams like Clemson, Notre Dame, Alabama, and LSU, and Bill Belichick's debut at North Carolina.
It's so special when these teams collide.
Don't miss a lineup filled with electric matchups.
Welcome back to college football.
Kickoff week presented by Modelo. Labor Day weekend on ESPN and ABC. Also available to stream on the all-new ESPN app.